wondering when you were gonna get up.
Well, how long have I been out?
I'd say a good 5 hours.
Huh. I expected the Rocky Mountains to be a little rockier than this.
I was thinking the same thing. That John Denver's full of it.
I'm only human, Harry! Anybody can make a mistake. Come on! Stop being a baby! So we backtracked a tad.
A tad? A tad, Lloyd? You drove almost a sixth of the way across the country in the wrong direction! Now we don't have enough money to get to Aspen. We don't have enough money to get home. We don't have enough money to eat. We don't have enough money to sleep.
Well, it's not gonna do us any good to sit here whining about it. We're in a hole. We're just gonna have to dig ourselves out.
Okay, all right, you're right. You're absolutely right, Lloyd.
Where are you going?
Home. I'm walking home.
Oh, well, pardon me, Mr. Perfect! I guess I forgot that you never ever make a mistake!
License. For those of you youngins here that don't have your driver's license yet, prepare. It's going to happen to you. Although it's kind of funny when that happens sometimes, when you mean to go somewhere and you end up somewhere else. I've heard of some stories of some business travelers that have mistakenly taken a left instead of a right at the airport terminal gate and ended up getting on a plane to somewhere different. And those make for really funny stories when it comes to travel, although it can be pretty annoying. But when our lives make a wrong turn, when somehow we end up finding ourselves in a destination we did not expect to end up in, that is a whole lot less humorous. And this is kind of the problem that I find with New Year's resolutions, is that every year millions of people, myself included, we make a resolution to improve in some area in our life in the coming year. And for most of us, we end up falling flat. Now, it could be a minor resolution that you make. It could be to leave more milk in the milk bag or the milk jug for the next person after you, instead of just leaving a teeny little amount so you can say, hey, I left some. It could be a New Year's resolution to signal while changing lanes. If that's you, please follow through on that. But for many people, New Year's resolutions can be a whole lot more serious. It could be acknowledging that your marriage needs a little bit of attention, and you make a resolution to improve your marriage in the coming year. For some of us, it's dealing with debt, especially this time of year after Christmas, where the average Canadian spends, I don't know how many thousands on credit. It could be a resolution to get in shape. It could be a resolution to quit smoking or drink less or even to quit coffee, which I did last year for about 2 weeks. And it took 2 weeks for the headaches to go away, but I survived. It could be to improve your grades in school. Maybe you're a high school student or a university student, and your New Year's resolution is to study more so you can get your grades up. Well, no matter big or small, the challenge each and every one of us is going to face is how are we going to turn our good intentions into a sustainable pattern of behavior that actually lasts. Now, just so you know, I've made a few New Year's resolutions of my own this year, including spending more dedicated time with each of my 4 children. I have 4 kids that are aged 12, 10, 6, and turning 5 shortly. It's difficult to do when you have 4 kids to spend dedicated time with them. But that's one of my resolutions. Another is to start working out more and lose some of the flab I've accumulated after 8 months of late night, eating a whole bag of chips and pop and stuff late at night when your body can't burn the calories. Another resolution is just to be less distracted with work stuff while I'm home. And my wife is in here somewhere probably screaming, amen, to that. I'm on the computer quite often when I'm home. Those are some of mine. I'm wondering if you have some. And regardless of whether you do or not, I'm sure there's an area of your life this morning you would acknowledge, you know what, it would be good to make an improvement in that area of my life. I want to look at a passage in the Bible this morning that is going to teach us a principle that just might make your 2013 goals possible, and mine as well. Now, the passage we're going to look at is one of the most famous passages in the Bible. And for some of you who haven't been around in church, you may not know this story. Some of you may have heard of this story. But it's the story of David and Bathsheba. And now, regardless of your familiarity with it, I think the danger is with things that are familiar, particularly with stories that sometimes get told to you when you're young. We think, oh, that's so basic. That's just like it's not exactly a children's story, but we think, oh, it's what can I get from that? But what I found in my life, and I see this in professional sports all the time, is that even professionals start messing up in the basic stuff, the fundamental stuff. You see guys that get paid $25 million a year that go into this really long slump, and they have coaches that get paid a lot of money to help them pay attention to the things they learned in Little League. And so, even though there's some real basic stuff to this, I think it applies a lot to us this morning. So in a moment, I'm going to have all the passage up on the screen. You can just follow along. But just a little bit of background to the stage that we're going to come up to here with David's story. David, he has reached amazing heights of success when we get to this passage. He's been king over Israel. He was known to be a man after God's own heart. He had integrity. He was known as a really pure guy. If you hung around David, you'd be like, that guy inspires me. He walks the walk. He's a really great guy. No doubt, David's intentions were the same as they had always been. He wanted to live a life filled with integrity. He wanted to be a good husband and father, and to enjoy the remaining days of his life. But as we're going to see here, though, his intentions did not pan out the way that he had envisioned them. This is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It reads just like something you would see on TV or in a movie. We're going to go ahead and read through this. I'm going to summarize some of it, and we've got some really awesome principles, I think, that we're going to learn from this. Let's follow along on the screen. David and Bathsheba, 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 to 17. It says, in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David stayed back. He remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. Now, just as a hint here, when the Bible says someone is beautiful, I think we all know what that means. But when the Bible says she was very beautiful, I mean, I don't know what the modern day terminology for that is, but she was like drop dead gorgeous. And David, he sees her, and let's see how it continues here. It says, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, David, she's Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Now, this messenger is trying to help David out. He's saying, hey, David, I know you're the king and everything, and it's not my place to tell you what to do, but she's a married woman. Hint, hint. Don't pay attention. Don't do what you're thinking of doing. But then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I am pregnant. Now the king of Israel's got a big problem on his hands. He thought this was like a one-night stand. He thought it was just going to be something that would pass really quickly, no big deal, and move on with his life. But now he's got a real problem. Bathsheba's pregnant, and it looks as though David is going to be found out. Verse 6, so David sent the word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, go to your house and wash your feet. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and did not go to his own house. Uriah is an honorable guy. I don't know. I know some of you have a background in the military, so you would understand. He's supposed to be over with his buddies, his trench mates, doing his job. He doesn't understand why he's been called back. And so the king is saying, hey, go hang out with your wife, get to know each other. And Uriah, like a good soldier, he's thinking, how can I do that when all my buddies are over doing their job, risking their life? I'm not gonna enjoy that pleasure. I'm gonna sit out and so you see Uriah is an upstanding guy here, right? Let's see here. So where am I? I'm in verse 10, am I?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I get lost easily. David was told Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why don't you go home? Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house and eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." Then David said to him, "Stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, Uriah ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. David is thinking, how can I make this happen? So obviously he gets him liquored up, right? He's thinking, oh man, now he's got some wine in his stomach. You know, he's certainly going to go home and try to, help David out of this fix, right? So verse 14. In the morning, so you see that he did not go home. So it didn't happen. Verse 14. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it, he wrote, "Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him, so he will be struck down and die." So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Kind of shocking twist here at the end. Uriah, like a good soldier, is delivering the letter that is his death sentence. He doesn't know it, and he's such an honorable guy, he doesn't even open it to see, gee, I wonder what the king's writing here. He just goes ahead, hands it to the commander, and Uriah the Hittite dies. Now, if you were to continue reading through the book of 2 Samuel after this, you'll see that although David thought he was going to get away with it, because he is the king and all, as you read the rest of the story, you see David gets caught. But not only does he get caught, but what he spent his whole life building, all the work David had done to become king and be known as a man of integrity and great wealth, and he had everything anyone would want. And you'll see as you continue reading, he loses everything. There's strife in his home. It's one of the most dysfunctional families that you'll ever see as you continue to read. Wars are fought because of this decision that David made. And so here are a few basic things that I think are clear from this story. And it seems almost not worth saying, it's so basic, but this is where, for many of us, this is where we experience pain and frustration and regret with how it pertains to our life and our goals. From this story, we see that direction, not intention, determines destination. Direction, not intention, determines destination. And the interesting thing, we know this so much when it comes to driving. It's so obvious. If I wanted to go to Toronto today, and if I went on down the Appleby line and I got on the QEW and I headed west, and then I start kind of curving around back to the southeast, and I end up in the fine city of Niagara Falls, it would be foolish for me to say, man, how did I get here? Like, I even prayed about it. I said before, God, help me to get to Toronto today and give me a great day. But then because I took a direction that was different, it doesn't matter what my intentions were. I moved my life, or I moved my car, in a direction that was going away from what I really, really wanted. That seems really basic and clear when it comes to driving. But as I look at my life and the decisions, both good and bad, that I've made over my life, sometimes there's a disconnect between those two things. And for many of us, in our marriage, for example, we may intend on having a rockin' marriage where it's got everything. You've got friendship, you're playing board games, you enjoy spending time together, you're still hot for each other, all that stuff. You might intend, all the young people are like, but you might intend on that. But if you take a direction with your life where you focus on your work and you focus in your career and you're coming home from work just exhausted, you don't have time to give anything to your marriage because you've spent all of it on your work. Or perhaps it's hobbies. Or perhaps it's just selfishness and just saying, I don't have time for this. I don't want this right now. I can't do that. It could be laziness. And rather than work on it, you just kind of move on and you're buried. I know I should have a better marriage. I know I should spend time with my spouse and speak her love language or his love language, but I just don't have time. That's something that's in play for many of us in here this morning. I get really dry lips when I talk, so forgive me if I need to do this just a few times. All right. It could be in dating. You may intend on finding someone who is going to love you for who you are. But if your only criteria for who you're going to date is that they're hot and they ask you out and so you'll go out with them, if that's your only criteria, you are heading in a direction where you might be shocked to find out, man, he doesn't really love me for who I am. And you might find yourself feeling used and saying, how did this happen? Because your intentions, it didn't pan out in the direction that you took. In our finances, you may intend on having margin. You may intend on having money in the bank to cover when the car breaks down or for unexpected things. You may intend on having great finances, but if you spend everything that you make, and if you're living beyond your means with credit and financing and all of that, and if you're choosing not to look at your bills or answer the phone call because you know who's calling and you know what's in that envelope, and you take a direction where I'm just not going to think of that, you might end up in a place totally different than what you intended. A couple more. In your relationship, and in my relationship with my kids, we may intend on having a relationship that both the kids and us enjoy. And you might intend on living out a great balance between loving discipline and showing your kids it's not all fun and games. There's discipline in life. You might intend to balance that perfectly with the fun and the hugs and the love and all of that. But if you don't block out time for your kids to just have fun with them and spend time with them, if you spend more time at work or working out at the gym or hanging out with your friends, your kids will be gone before you know it. And you can't turn things around. And you'll have regret and guilt. And lastly, but equally important, young people, and I know some of you are in here this morning, under 18, you may intend on having a great relationship with your mom or dad, where there's trust, and when you say, hey, can I have the keys to the car, can I have a sleepover, can I have money for such and such, you may intend on having this great relationship where they're like, okay, Billy, here's $100, and you're like, woo! You might intend on having that kind of relationship with your parents. But if every time they ask you to do something, you speak to them in a way that you wouldn't want to be spoken to, there's an attitude, there's a disrespect, there's a frustration and anger. If that's the direction you take in your relationship, you might not have the relationship with your mom or dad that you intended. And sometimes we see someone shipwreck their life. It could be a celebrity, it could be someone in your own life. And you see what they've done and how they've taken their life kind of over the cliff, and you say, how did this happen? Like they were like student council president, or like they were like I don't know, I would never have expected it to them. How did that happen to them? Well, what happened was, in all likelihood, not every time, but in all likelihood, they took a direction that led there. And here's a very logical question I think we should ask at this point. Why do we so often take a direction that we don't intend on going? It doesn't seem logical. If we intend to do something, if we want it, you would figure that we would follow through with that. Why is it that for so many of us we don't go in a direction? Well, here's the key. And I think if we can figure this out, it will save us a world of hurt and a world of difficulty. And if we can figure this out, it might help us to put our 2013 resolutions into action. Ready? Here it is. There are things that come along in our lives that capture our attention. There are things that come along that capture our attention. We see this in the story of David. David is doing his kingly duties. Everything's fine. He hasn't hasn't shipwrecked his life. Things are great. And then all of a sudden, something captured his attention. He was totally, whoa, laser beam, wow, you've got my full undivided attention. And we can see that that's what took him in a direction he didn't want to go. It was because his attention was captured by a woman who was not his wife. There are times in life where our attention is captured. Can you think of something in your life, maybe in the past or now, that it's captured your attention? I can remember when I was 18 years old, I was living in Brockville, Ontario, about 5 hours down the 401 from the city I mainly grew up in Cambridge, Ontario. And I had a best friend named Tanya all the way through high school. When I was 14 years old, I had a hunch that she was like the woman I would love to grow old with. Like we had so much fun. We had such a trust in our friendship. All the way from 14 to 18 years old, we never kissed. So that like sometimes you kind of, you get infatuated with somebody and physical stuff kind of like overrides your senses. This relationship had it all. And it just wasn't meant to be. And it kind of broke it severely broke my heart. I don't know if you can relate to having your heart broken by a significant other, but I was in Brockville. I was about 8 months ahead of when I said, okay, I guess Tanya's not the one for me. I'm moving on. I'm serving God. I knew I was going into the ministry, and I didn't want to just go to college to go into ministry and find out I really wasn't meant to be in the ministry. Some people say they feel called by God to do something, and then they find out it was just their cornflakes. I didn't want that to be me. So I went to Brockville to do ministry for a year, and I figured if God wants me to go in ministry, two things will probably be true. One, I'll enjoy it, and two, I'll be good at it. And so I was in Brockville doing that, and I got a phone call one night as I'm kind of doing my sermon prep from Tanya, my best friend. She calls me and says, hey, I've got a surprise for you. And don't you hate, and she wasn't going to tell me, don't you hate that when someone says they've got a surprise for you and then they're not going to tell you what it is? So I got it out of her. She said, I'm coming to visit you this weekend. I'm getting on a train, and I want to see what you're doing in ministry at this church. And so she came, and partly my guard was up, because when your heart's been broken in a million pieces before, you don't trust quite as easily, right? And so she came, and I remember that weekend we had a lot of fun. And I remember Sunday at church, Tanya dressed to kill. Oh my goodness, I still remember, like, the outfit she was wearing, it like kind of captured my attention. I'm like, wow, Tanya is amazing. Next thing we know, just a couple months later, and I'm leaving out a bunch of juicy kind of soap opera kind of stuff. You can hear about that in the Wide Awake series in February. But Tanya captured my attention. And from that moment on, my life has never been the same. Tanya and I, we've been married for 14 years this coming July. It's been the best thing ever. And I'm madly in love with my wife. She's at the back there. But anyway, yeah, she's embarrassed now. But we all know what it's, hopefully you know what it's like to have your attention captured by something really good. Equally, though, in my life, there have been things that have captured my attention that I wish I had nothing to do with. I don't know if you can relate to that. Thinking maybe it was a relationship, maybe it was a financial decision, and in hindsight you're like, I wish I never paid any attention to that, because that was just a dead end and I wasted a few years. I remember going to the Rogers Center. Actually, it was the Sky Dome back then. And I remember walking through, and they're like, free duffel bags, get your duffel bag. And I'm like, oh, I want a Blue Jays duffel bag. What do I do? And they're like, oh, just fill out this application. I'm like, oh, MasterCard? Oh, hey, well, I don't really want a MasterCard. I want the duffel bag, but I'll fill it out. So I did that. I got myself a free duffel bag, and I got myself a Blue Jays MasterCard. I was down at the Rogers Center just a little while after that, like maybe the next year, and they had the coolest t-shirt. I mean, it had to be at least a $4 t-shirt. And it had like this, and I'm like, man, I need that. And so all I had to do was fill out an application. I thought, well, hey, I did this last time, no problem. Fill it out. I got another Blue Jays MasterCard, and I got 2 MasterCards. Life is going really, really good. The problem was, I spent the limit on both of those credit cards. And some things on frivolous stuff, and other things you're like, well, you know, we could really go on a date tonight, and I don't get paid till next week, but let's go on the date. And I look at how that captured my attention, a silly duffel bag and a silly t-shirt. And I wish I paid no attention to that. And so some of you can relate also to things that have captured your attention in a bad way. But attention isn't always just captured. Sometimes attention is something you have to give to something, even when it's not a thrill. And some of you can relate to that as well. For some of you, you study like crazy. Not because you enjoy studying, not because you like locking yourself in a room and like looking at a book all day. You give attention to that because you know that when you give that attention, it's going to take you in a direction that you actually want to go. For some of you, it might be making more sales calls than the next guy, for any salespeople in the room. You know that you just need to work harder than the other guy. So you don't like doing it. You don't like picking up the phone or doing the door-to-door surveys, but you give attention to that. For some of you, it's working out at the gym. I recently started working out at CrossFit. I hate it, but I love it. It's one of those things. Like, I don't go because I'm like, wow, I love the pain I feel when I'm there. I do it because I know giving attention to that is going to give me the ripped abs that I'm looking for, hopefully. Tanya wants me to have Joey McIntyre abs, like the Kids on the Block, but that's a whole other sermon. And for some of you, you block out your family time. Not necessarily because you're like, oh, I have this dying urge to say no to going to that guys' weekend with my buddies to the football game. I have this dying urge to not go so I can just kind of have a quiet weekend at home with my family. And that's something you're not necessarily fired up about at first, but you give attention to that because you know that's going to take your family life in a direction that you want to go. For me, practicing baseball was something I gave attention to when I was growing up. My dad, who's here today visiting from Florida. I'm really glad my brother came up from Florida. All my family's here, and I didn't even intend on acknowledging that, so just pretend I didn't say that. Awkward moments with Mike. I remember my dad got me this spring-loaded net that I would set up 60 feet away, and I'd go with a whole bucket of baseballs, and I had like some tape in the middle of this net, and that represented the strike zone. And I would go out, and at the time, we were living in Miami, Florida, and if you don't know, Miami is very hot. So I would go out in the blistering heat, and I would throw 100 balls all the time at this net, and I'd practice perfecting my curveball. I'd try aiming my curveball way outside of the net and watch the thing drop right in and hit right in the middle of that. And I practiced and practiced and practiced. And I gave attention to that, not because I loved the practice, but because I loved what that ended up doing in the games for me. And so the thing that we need to do is we need to realize with your New Year's resolution, whatever your goal is, the thing you pay attention to is going to drive the direction. Author Andy Stanley calls this the principle of the path. You might want to write that down. I don't think I have a slide for it, but Andy Stanley wrote this book called The Path Principle. And you can pick it up on iTunes. I don't know about you. I listen to more audiobooks than I read, but you can get them in either place. But in this Path Principle book, Andy points out, this principle is taught in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The principle of the path, it's taught in every single book of the Bible. You can see examples of what we're talking about here this morning. The principle is easy to see at work in the lives of other people. You can see it with your friends. It's very difficult to see in the mirror. You can see behavior in a friend. You know that they drink too much. You know that they work too much. They neglect their family. You know, maybe they're talking to a coworker at work they really shouldn't be talking to because that might be leading somewhere that they don't intend to go as it pertains to their marriage. It's so easy to see in other people. Incredibly difficult to see in the mirror. So you say you want to pay more attention to your health this year. But you figure, one last cigarette, one last drink, one last late night poutine. And you keep saying to yourself, I'm fine, it's okay, there's time. And you keep putting it off. It's easy to see in other people. It's hard to see in ourselves. The people who love you can see it in your life, and they're hoping that you might see it as well. Maybe it is your marriage. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe it's your study habits. Maybe it's your health or your relationship with your kids or your relationship with your parents or something else. Before I close with two questions that I want to reflect on, I want to touch base briefly, though, on what this principle, how this principle applies to Starting Point Church. Now, our intention is to create a church that unchurched people love to attend. We want people that weren't raised in church or haven't been in years, we want them to come to one of our services, and one of my biggest goals would be that people would come up to me afterwards and say, hey, listen, I don't know if I buy all the Jesus Bible stuff yet, perhaps, maybe I will later, but that was really helpful. That applies to my life. And man, the environment was great. I really enjoyed it. I'll be back. I don't know where I'm at in my faith journey, but I feel like this is a place I can come and just be who I am and take it or leave it. I'll see you next Sunday. That's one of the intentions that we have. So if we're going to do that, though, we need to give attention and pay attention to things that are going to, as a church, help us get there. We're going to need to love outsiders the way that Jesus did. When you read the ministry of Jesus, the religious people were always so upset with Jesus because he kept hanging out with the wrong people. He kept hanging out with, there were two different classifications religious people gave. There were sinners, they were like bad people. They weren't paying attention to God's laws. There were sinners, and then there were tax collectors. I guess that still translates today. Well, that's really bad still today, I guess, for a lot of us. But Jesus continually, he was going to their parties. He was hanging out with these people. And the religious people were looking at Jesus going, do you know who they are? Like, I don't know if you ought to be hanging out with those kinds of people. And so if we're going to be effective at what we're trying to do, we need to love outsiders the way that Jesus did. We're going to need to accept people who are different than us. You see Jesus time and time again with someone that wasn't religious and they encountered Jesus. He would meet a need in their life. He would say, you're forgiven, you're loved. And he would meet a need. And then after that, he would say, now go and leave your life of sin. And people, as they left, they didn't feel condemned about that. They didn't feel like, oh man, that guy just judged me. They were thinking, wow, like he loved me and accepted me as I am, and he challenged me. I know I need to be challenged. I need to do better with that. And so we're going to need to accept people that are different than us. Wow, we need to be aware of how long our services are. We need to be aware of how long our services are, what time we meet at, how much singing we do on Sunday mornings. I've done a lot of door-to-door surveys, and for a lot of people that go to church for the first time, sometimes too much singing it's difficult for someone who's an outsider. Now, usually, the longer you go to church, the more you start loving that. As you get to know the words, all you want to do is sing. As a church, we're going to have once a month worship services on a Sunday night, where we're going to do tons of music, tons of songs. And if that's something you want, you come here on Sunday mornings, you like a couple songs you hear, you're like, I'd really like to go to that. We're going to rock it out and have an extended time of singing and that sort of thing. But we need to be aware and pay attention to how much singing and what time we meet at. We need to create environments that are relevant to people today. Partly the reason we're meeting in this very expensive to rent theater is because I think a nice environment, it really matters to people. To walk into, I don't know if you've ever walked into your grandma's house. There's nothing bad with grandma's house, but sometimes there's a smell about it, right? And there's like shag carpet, and you're like, cool, I didn't know this stuff existed apart from pictures on the internet. And so sometimes the longer churches go, it's difficult because we kind of stay the same, sometimes decades after where we should be. We're going to need to pay attention to the environments that we use. One day this theater may not be acceptable. We'll need to move somewhere else. But it's not about the building. It doesn't matter. It's about environments that are going to help us to reach people who don't go to church. And the last thing I want to say on this, we need to provide next steps for people to grow in their relationship with Jesus that are both challenging next steps and realistic next steps. I remember when I first became a Christian in high school. You can go online to our website and see Mike's story. I share about how I went from being someone who didn't go to church to someone that goes to church. But sorry, I'm blanking out just for a second here. But this next steps thing, we need to provide next steps that are realistic. Because it's kind of like working out. If you've ever hung around people who do P90X and are like really working out hardcore, usually they don't want to hang out with anybody that's doing that wimpy walk stuff or like the jogging or cardio, yoga stuff. Like, oh, that's for like beginners. We're getting real thing done over here, right? Well, unfortunately, that's kind of what happens as you walk with Jesus. Sometimes you forget about what it was like when you didn't know anything at all. And to go to a church where they're saying you need to give 10% of all your money right now, and you need to volunteer for 40 hours a week or whatever unrealistic number, and they guilt and they pressure and they guilt and they pressure. We need to be very, very careful to allow next steps that make sense. To go from getting off the couch fitness-wise to going for a walk, that's something to celebrate. Woo, you went for a walk. For someone to choose to go from walking to running, that's something to celebrate. For someone that goes from running to lifting some weights, we want to celebrate all the way along the line. So as a church, we would love to see people come to a place where inside they're like, I want this. I want to learn everything about Jesus and the Bible, and I want to go. We think that's great when you own it. But we do not want to pressure anybody to do that, and so we need to provide next steps that are both realistic and challenging for people to grow in their relationship with Jesus. And just kind of as I close here, I'm aware of going too long. I mentioned that as one of my things. But although the message of our church is unwavering, that God created us to have a relationship with Him. That's why we're here. God designed us to know God and experience Him. And although that's the case, we're separated from God. We don't know God's love or plan for our life, and things got really messed up because of the sin in our lives and as human beings. And the message is that Jesus came to restore our relationship with a perfect and holy God. Jesus, He lived the life that we couldn't live, so that when we follow Jesus, God looks at us and He sees Jesus. And all the bad stuff we ever did, Jesus was punished for. And all the good stuff Jesus ever did is written into our name. And when we choose to trust Jesus and follow Him, we can have a restored relationship with God that's exciting and life-changing and amazing and all that stuff. So although that's our core message, we want to take a path of love, a path of patience, a path of tolerance, knowing that God is the only one who can change our hearts. Not guilt trips, not rules, not judgment, not a whole load of information. God can do that. So we hope as a church to give attention to people who don't go to church and create an environment that's inspiring and it's fun. When was the last time you saw a Dumb and Dumber clip at a church? Who does that? We want a church that's fun and inspiring and helpful. And hopefully you'll see that we're already taking some steps in that direction. But back to us for a moment. I'm going to put 2 questions up on the board here that I'd like to just leave for you to think about. So 2 questions I want to leave with you. The first is, what has captured or grabbed your attention that if you're honest, it could be steering your life in the wrong direction? What has captured or grabbed your attention that if you're honest, it could be steering your life in the wrong direction? It could be a relationship that you know is not going to get you where you want. It could be a crutch. It could be finances. It could be your body and health. It could be any number of things. But what has captured or grabbed your attention that if you're honest, it could be steering your life in the wrong direction? And the last question is, what do you need to begin giving or paying attention to that has the potential to steer your life in the wrong direction? What do you need to begin giving or paying attention to that has the potential to steer your life in the right direction? This is the whole New Year's resolution thing, how to turn intention into action. It has everything to do with the attention that you pay to things. And I know from experience, it's rarely fun. Discipline, I hate discipline. I have a whole lot more fun being lazy and having good intentions. But what I know is, as a 34-year-old, is that in a lot of areas of my life, there's potential for me to be like David. And you might be here this morning thinking, hey, life's pretty good, everything's all right, and your guard's kind of down like David was. I'd like to suggest to you, if King David, a man after God's own heart, known as one of the most righteous people in the Bible, if he could fall as he did, it could happen to me, it could happen to you. And what is going to determine whether that happens or not is where you give and pay attention to.